So, I used to work the night shift at this 24/7 convenience store in a pretty quiet part of town. It was one of those places where nothing ever really happened. And the most exciting part of my shift was usually restocking the shelves or dealing with the occasional drunk customer. But one night, things got really weird. It was Tuesday, and the store was dead as usual. I was halfway through my shift, around 2 a.m., and I was just about to start my routine of cleaning the coffee machine when this guy walked in. He looked pretty normal at first glance. Mid-30s, average build, wearing a hoodie and jeans. But there was something off about him. He had this blank look in his eyes, like he was in a trance or something. He didn't say a word, just walked straight to the back of the store where we kept the drinks. I didn't think much of it at first, but then I noticed he was just standing there, staring at the fridge. I mean, he wasn't even looking at the drinks, just staring at the fridge door. It was creepy, but I figured maybe he was just really tired or something. After a few minutes, I decided to go check on him. "Hey man, you need any help?" I asked, trying to sound casual. He didn't respond and didn't even acknowledge me. He just kept staring at the fridge. I was starting to get a little freaked out, but I didn't want to make a scene. So I just went back to the counter and kept an eye on him. About 10 minutes later, he finally moved. He grabbed a bottle of water from the fridge and walked up to the counter. I rang him up and he paid without saying a word. As he was leaving, he turned to me and said, "Don't go outside tonight." His voice was flat, almost robotic. Then he just walked out. I was pretty shaken up, but I tried to brush it off. Maybe he was just messing with me. Or maybe he was on something. Either way, I wasn't about to let some weirdo ruin my night. But then, about an hour later, things got even stranger. I was restocking the shelves when I heard a noise outside. It sounded like someone was tapping on the window. I looked up, but I didn't see anything. I figured it was just my imagination, but then I heard it again. Tap, tap, tap. It was definitely coming from the window. I walked over to the window and looked outside, but there was no one there. The street was completely empty. I was starting to get really freaked out, but I tried to stay calm. Maybe it was just the wind or something. I went back to restocking the shelves, but the tapping kept getting louder and more persistent. It was like someone was trying to get my attention. I couldn't take it anymore, so I grabbed my phone and called my manager. I told him what was happening, and he said he'd be there in about 20 minutes. While I was waiting for my manager to show up, the tapping stopped. I was relieved, but I couldn't shake the feeling that something was wrong. I kept glancing at the window, half expecting to see someone standing there. When my manager finally arrived, I told him everything that had happened. He checked the security footage, but there was nothing unusual on the cameras. No one had been outside the store, and there was no sign of the guy who had warned me earlier. My manager tried to reassure me, saying it was probably just a prank or my imagination playing tricks on me. But I knew what I had heard, and I couldn't shake the feeling that something was out there. I finished my shift without any more incidents, but I couldn't stop thinking about that guy and his warning. "Don't go outside tonight?" What did he mean? Was he trying to protect me? Or was he part of whatever was happening? I never saw the guy again, and nothing like that ever happened during my shifts after that night. But every time I worked the night shift, I couldn't help but feel a little on edge, always glancing at the window, waiting for the tapping to start again. I've been working the night shift at the small local hospital for about 6 months now. I'm a nurse, and while the job can be demanding, it's usually pretty routine. But one night, something happened that still gives me chills whenever I think about it. It was a normal night, and I was assigned to the ER. The hospital was quiet, with only a few patients trickling in. Around 2 a.m., a man in his late 40s came in, complaining of severe abdominal pain. He looked like he was in a lot of distress, so we quickly got him into a room and started running some tests. As the night went on, his condition seemed to worsen. We couldn't figure out what was wrong with him. His vitals were all over the place, and he was in excruciating pain. We called in the on-call doctor. I won't say his name for privacy reasons. The doctor who arrived within 20 minutes is one of the best, and if anyone could figure out what was going on, it was him. He examined the patient and ordered more tests. We were all baffled. The tests came back normal, but the patient was clearly suffering. The doctor decided to keep him under observation and ordered some pain medication to help him get through the night. Around 4 a.m., I went to check on the patient. He was sweating profusely and looked even worse than before. He grabbed my hand and whispered, "Please, don't let them take me." I was confused and asked him who he was talking about, but he just kept repeating the same phrase over and over. I tried to reassure him, but he was inconsolable. I called the doctor, who came in and tried to calm the patient down. The patient eventually fell asleep, but his words kept echoing in my mind. As the night shift was coming to an end, I went to check on the patient one last time. When I entered the room, I noticed something strange. The patient's bed was empty. I checked the bathroom, but he wasn't there either. I started to panic and called for help. We searched the entire hospital, but there was no sign of him. We checked the security footage, and what we saw was chilling. Around 5:20-ish a.m., the patient got out of bed and walked down the hallway. He seemed to be in a trance, not responding to anyone or anything. He walked straight out of the hospital and into the parking lot. The cameras lost sight of him after that. How did he even got out without anyone seeing him? The security of this place, dude. We called the police and reported him missing. They searched the area but found no trace of him. It was like he had vanished into thin air. A few days later, I received a call from the police. They had found the patient's body in a nearby forest. The autopsy revealed that he had died from internal bleeding, but they couldn't determine the cause. There were no signs of trauma or injury. To this day, I can't explain what happened that night. The patient's words still haunt me, and I can't shake the feeling that there was something more to his story. I've been working the night shift at a 7-Eleven's for about 6 months now. It's not the most glamorous job, but it pays the bills, and I get to avoid the daytime rush. Plus, I get to meet some interesting characters during the graveyard shift. But last night was something else entirely. It started off like any other night. I clocked in at 10 p.m., grabbed a cup of coffee, and settled in behind the counter. The store was quiet as usual, with only the hum of the fluorescent lights and the occasional car passing by outside. Around midnight, things started to get a bit weird. A guy walked in looking disheveled and nervous. He was wearing a hoodie with the hood pulled up, and he kept glancing around like he was expecting someone to jump out at him. He grabbed a pack of cigarettes and a bottle of water, then came up to the counter. I tried to make small talk, but he just mumbled something and handed me a crumpled bill. As he left, I couldn't shake the feeling that something was off about him. About an hour later, a woman came in. She was dressed in business attire, which was odd for that time of night. She looked exhausted, with dark circles under her eyes and a strained expression on her face. She asked if she could use the restroom, and I pointed her the direction. She was in there for a long time, and I started to get worried. Just as I was about to check on her, she came out looking even more stressed than before. She thanked me and left without buying anything. The rest of the night was uneventful until around 3 a.m. That's when things took a turn for the worse. I was stocking shelves when I heard a loud crash from the back of the store. My heart skipped a beat, and I grabbed a flashlight before heading to investigate. As I approached the storage room, I could hear faint whispers and the sound of something being dragged across the floor. I cautiously opened the door and shone the flashlight inside. The room was a mess, with boxes and supplies scattered everywhere. In the corner, I saw a figure hunched over, rummaging through the shelves. I called out asking who they were and what they were doing. The figure froze, then slowly turned to face me. It was the guy from earlier, the one with the hoodie. His eyes were wild, and he looked even more disheveled than before. He started muttering something about needing to find it before they did. I had no idea what he was talking about, but I knew I needed to get him out of there. I told him to leave, but he just kept muttering and searching through the shelves. I decided to call the police, but as I reached for my phone, the guy lunged at me. We struggled for a moment before I managed to push him away and run back to the front of the store. I locked the door behind me and called 911, my hands shaking as I explained the situation. The police arrived within minutes, but by the time they got there, the guy was gone. They searched the store and the surrounding area, but found no trace of him. They took my statement and assured me they'd keep an eye out for him. But I couldn't shake the feeling that he was still out there, watching and waiting. I finished my shift in a daze, constantly looking over my shoulder and jumping at every little noise. When my relief finally arrived, I practically ran out of the store and drove home, my mind racing with thoughts of what had happened. I still don't know what that guy was looking for or who he was running from. But one thing's for sure, I'm never working the night shift again. I used to work the night shift at the small, family-owned warehouse. It wasn't a huge operation, just a place where we stored and shipped out various goods. The owners were nice enough, and the pay was decent, but the night shifts could get pretty lonely. Most nights, it was just me and the security guard, Tom. One night, I was working the 10 p.m. to 6 a.m. shift. It was a typical night, slow and uneventful. Around midnight, Tom came by to do his rounds. We chatted for a bit, and he mentioned that he had seen a couple of stray dogs hanging around the loading dock earlier. He said they looked pretty rough, so he had called animal control to come and check it out. After Tom left, I went back to my work. I was in the middle of organizing some inventory when I heard a noise coming from the loading dock. It sounded like something had fallen over. I figured it was probably just the wind or one of those stray dogs, but I decided to go check it out anyway. When I got to the loading dock, I didn't see anything out of the ordinary. The doors were closed and everything seemed to be in its place. I was about to head back inside when I heard the noise again. This time, it sounded like it was coming from one of the storage containers. I walked over to the container and opened the door. Inside, I saw a man crouched in the corner, rummaging through some boxes. He looked up at me with wide, panicked eyes. He was dirty and torn clothes and a wild look in his eyes. "Hey, what are you doing in here?" I asked, trying to keep my voice steady. The man didn't answer. He just stared at me for a moment before bolting past me and out the door. I tried to follow him, but he was too fast. By the time I got outside, he was already gone. I went back inside and called Tom on the radio. I told him what had happened, and he said he would come by to check it out. While I waited for him, I couldn't shake the feeling of unease. There was something about the man's eyes that had really freaked me out. When Tom arrived, we went back to the loading dock together. We searched the area but didn't find any sign of the man. Tom suggested that we check the security footage to see if we could figure out how he had gotten in. We went to the security office and pulled up the footage from the loading dock. Sure enough, we saw the man sneaking in through a small gap in the fence. He had been hiding in the container for a while before I found him. Tom called the police and reported the incident. They said they would send someone over to take a look, but it might take a while since it wasn't an emergency. In the meantime, Tom and I decided to do another sweep of the warehouse to make sure the man hadn't come back. As we were walking through the aisles, I couldn't shake the feeling that we were being watched. Every little noise made me jump, and I kept glancing over my shoulder. Tom tried to reassure me, but I could tell he was on edge too. We didn't find anything, so we went back to our respective posts. I tried to focus on my work, but I couldn't stop thinking about the man. Who was he? Why was he hiding in the warehouse? And what was he looking for? A couple of hours later, the police finally arrived. They took our statements and reviewed the security footage. They said they would keep an eye out for the man, but there wasn't much they could do without more information. The rest of the night passed without incident, but I couldn't shake the feeling of unease. I kept thinking about the man's eyes, the way he had looked at me with such fear and desperation. The next night, I went back to work, still feeling on edge. Tom and I did another sweep of the warehouse, but we didn't find anything. I tried to focus on my work, but I couldn't stop thinking about the man. A few days later, I heard from one of my coworkers that the police had caught the man. He had been living on the streets and had broken into the warehouse, looking for food and shelter. They said he had a history of mental illness and had been off his medication for a while. I felt a strange mix of relief and unease. On one hand, I was glad the man had been caught and was getting the help he needed. But on the other hand, I couldn't shake the feeling that there was something more to his story. I'll never forget that night at the warehouse. It was a reminder that sometimes the most terrifying things are the ones that are all too real.